Good evening. I'm Jacob Hornberger, and this is my weekly internet show. New York Times had some interesting articles in today's issue, the Sunday edition. Uh, First of all, they're talking about the terrible time that seniors are having, people in their 50s and 60s are having with respect to their economic activity. Many of them are unemployed. They can't find jobs. They say that their children can't start families. They lack the money. They're in debt. Um, in other words, overall, things are pretty bad for the baby boomer generation. And mostly those in their 60s. They said that many of them are going on Social Security early, which means they incur some kind of penalty, a permanent penalty of, I don't know, 30% reduction for the rest of their lives or something like that. Well, what was interesting about this article is where they placed the blame. They placed the blame on the recession. They say, oh, the recession and its aftermath is what has caused all this pain. But what these people, the statists, never even comprehend. I mean, it doesn't form part of their mental calculus. Is the possibility, we libertarians would call it the certainty, that it's the welfare state, the regulated economy, that has failed here. I mean, look how bad things are, and yet, how many people sit there and say, well, this experiment that we did was a bad experiment. Look what it's brought us. Instead they think in terms of, oh, well, this is just a recession or the failure of the free market. We need more regulation. We need more welfare. We need more government spending, more government borrowing. In other words, they cannot comprehend that all these decades of welfare statism, of socialism, of economic interventionism, of regulation have failed. That they haven't produced this land of prosperity of economic opportunity. Instead, things are pretty bad. I mean, we all see the young people that they can't start families. Many of them are still living at home. They can't buy a home. And why is this? Because they can't keep a large amount of their money. They can't save any money. Who saves money now out of their paycheck? And if you can't save money, how do you get a down payment? And they can't turn to their parents for a down payment because their parents are hurting. The value of their retirement portfolio has dropped. In other words, this whole paradigm is just an economic catastrophe. This paradigm of the welfare state regulated economy. I mean, if people had listened to us libertarians 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, if they listened to us now, there wouldn't be any of this economic travail. Look what Medicare and Medicaid have done to the healthcare system. I mean, healthcare costs soaring out of control. People don't have health insurance. And the article talked about that many of these unemployed people, they don't have any health insurance. People are doing all these home remedies and stuff to stay out of the doctor's office and praying that nothing goes wrong, because it'll just wipe them out. They default on their mortgage, lose their houses. Well, you see, but the statist never thinks about, well, maybe it's the Medicare and Medicaid that caused all these problems. It doesn't calculate for them. Their mindset is set that Medicare and Medicaid is a permanent part of a free society. This is our legacy. And if there's problems in the healthcare arena, it's got to be the free market. It cannot be these socialist programs. That's the mindset of the statist. If we had prevailed, we libertarians had prevailed in convincing people of this junk, to get rid of this junk 30 years ago, let's just say 30 years ago. Now, imagine how much people pay in income taxes and payroll taxes and so forth. Now, we'd gotten rid of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the whole socialist junk. When the boomers were, let's say, in their 30s, and we just ditched it and said everything's going to be voluntary. You take care of your parents on a voluntary basis. You can have charitable organizations coming into existence to help seniors and so forth. If we had just ditched this whole system 30 years ago, Think about how much you've paid in taxes if you're a senior. You've paid what? Let's say on average $20,000 a year. It's probably higher, but let's say the average couple has paid $20,000 a year. Well, if you multiply $20,000 times 30 years, that's $600,000 that would now be sitting in people's bank accounts, plus interest. Probably be up to about $750,000 with compound interest. That's a nice little nest egg for retirement. Much better than Social Security, because we all know that there's no fund there. It all depends on how much people are willing to plunder and loot the young people who are already struggling. So imagine that if everybody had kept everything there, and no income tax, no IRS, no keeping deductions and rushing to the post office, no more tax returns. Keep everything you earn. You decide what to do with it. People have on average, and it might even be more if you paid more than $20,000. You'd have $1 million in the bank if people had listened to us libertarians 30 years ago. Now, granted, water under the bridge, but you see, all of the things that we have said for the last 30, 40 years are now coming to pass. I mean, in the old days, when I was in college, they were saying, oh, in the long run, we're all dead. We don't need to worry about that. Well, this is the long run now. For people living 30, 40 years ago, we're now in their long run. And look at the system. You see, in the early days when there was a lot of people to plunder and a few people to take the dole, oh, happy days, you see. I mean, let me give you a hypothetical. Suppose you've got 10 people that are on the dole. Okay, they're figuring, okay, well, we've got to fund our dole, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and let's say there's 1,000 people that are out producing wealth. Okay, well, hey, those 10 people look at those 1,000 people, say, man, happy days are here. We can take a certain percentage of income of all those people. They won't notice. It'll be a small percentage. And man, we can go to the golf course every day. We can just have a good time. This is great. So you got 1,000 people funding the 10. Yeah, But what happens over time is the 10 starts to expand. And 20, 30, 200, 500, 1,000, so that ultimately your dole recipients are outnumbering your wealth producing recipients, until now you got the boomers, they're expanding out, retiring, and they're looking at this smaller group of people, their children and their grandchildren, to plunder and loot. And so you can see the problem. Now suppose you got 1,000 people that are now on the dole and 10 people that they look to confiscate wealth to fund the dole. Well, all of a sudden, it ain't the golf courses and all this, it's beans instead, because the 10 can't sustain the burden of supporting through this massive coercive system, the 1,000. And so you see that in the early days of a welfare state, man, it's hunky-dory. You go to Cuba, and when Fidel Castro was confiscating everybody's wealth, all the wealthy people in Cuba, man, happy days. Look at this, man, we can help the poor. They were evicting the wealthy people out of their houses, their mansions, putting poor people in there. They were nationalizing industries, all to help the poor. Yeah, happy days. But gradually, then what happens is that your wealth producing sector disappears. You either confiscate it out of existence, or you tax it out of existence, or the burden is just too great. And we see that to a large extent, with young people not being able to save. Saving is the key to a wealthy society. Now, interestingly enough, the Times also had a book review of a book about what life was like in the 1880s. And, they were talking about all the innovation, the inventions, the dynamics of American society. Well, what they didn't tell you is how different that society was in philosophical terms and economic terms than the society we live under today. Okay, here you are. Let's say 1885. You've got no income tax, no IRS, no capital gains, no inheritance tax, no drug war, no immigration controls. You've got, no economic regulation to speak of. There were some regulations. The Sherman Antitrust Act had come into existence. This is where the progressives were starting to make a little bit of headway. Um, well, this is a remarkable society. No foreign aid, no standing army to support. So, in other words, everybody got to keep everything they earned. And they got to open up businesses without seeking permits and licenses and all that, government rigmarole. No Social Security, no welfare, no Medicare, no Medicaid, free market healthcare system, individual responsibility, handling your own retirement, voluntary charity. And this really was the most remarkable economic period in American history. I mean, real standards of living were doubling, especially for those at the bottom of the economic ladder. There was a reason why penniless immigrants were leaving Europe and Asia and coming to the United States. No welfare. They weren't coming on welfare to get on welfare. They were coming to work and make an opportunity for themselves. But it was so different philosophically because Americans believed in freedom, economic freedom. And their concept of economic freedom is you keep everything you earn, you can open up any business you want, consumer sovereignty, consumers decide whether you're going to stay in business, you can't go run and get a subsidy from the state, there's no bailouts, and you keep everything you earn, you decide what to do with it, handling your retirement, giving away to the churches, the museums, and oh, by the way, it was also the most charitable nation in history, not only the most prosperous. And then compare that to today, where you've got this progressive income tax, you've got Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public schooling, aid to foreign dictators. I mean, economic regulations out the gazoo. And so you've got these two different ways of life. And we said this, we've said it for decades. The Future of Freedom Foundation, where I'm president, we've been saying it their entire 23 years of our existence, that this system is doomed to fail. It's going to crack apart. You cannot have a plunder society where the government is plundering the wealth producers in order to fund the dole recipients. It cannot last. That ultimately you're going to have a crack up on it. And of course now we can see it all coming. I mean they're trying to get the Fed. The Fed's been injecting all this printed money into the system. Oh, this is the way to revitalize the economy. This will get people back to work. This will get them to pay taxes. This will fund our beloved welfare state. Well, it's fake prosperity. You can't make a society wealthy by just printing money. It just, fills up these little economic balloons that burst down the road, causing mass misery for people, like it did with this housing boom. If you could spend a nation rich through government, every nation on earth would be rich. Cuba would be rich. North Korea would be rich. All they got to do is crank up the printing presses and print the money. That all this does is, this inflationary printing of money, it distorts the economy, it distorts people's decision making, and it just makes things worse. I mean, there was a reason why the American people chose to reject paper money. That when they established this federal government, they said, here are your powers, and there was no power to issue paper money. None. Search in there. You won't find it. And they said that no state shall make anything but gold and silver coins a medium of exchange. That was the official money of the United States, gold and silver coins. That's what the gold standard meant. It wasn't some kind of paper money that's exchangeable in a certain amount of gold. No. That's all just propaganda and indoctrination. The idea of the gold standard was gold and silver coins were the medium of exchange. Ideal from a libertarian standpoint? Of course not. We prefer a free market. In monetary affairs. Let the market decide the best medium of exchange. But it certainly was the second best because there was none of this paper money, no Federal Reserve, no central bank. It produced this sense of capital accumulation, this economic prosperity that mankind had never seen and really hasn't seen since. And then this is where we are now. Well, okay, so what's the problem? Well, I started to talk to you tonight about public schooling and, about the whole concept of public schooling. And I thought, no, I want to talk about this article. But then I thought, I can talk about public schooling anyway because, they really fit together. Because part of the problem is that is the indoctrination. I mean, if you go and do a survey of Americans, and you ask them, what kind of economic system does America have? They'll say, oh, free enterprise, free enterprise. It's all free enterprise. It's always free enterprise. America's founded on a free enterprise system. That's the success of public schooling. Okay? I mean, that's the success of the indoctrination. And what's fascinating about this indoctrination, I mean, how can you not indoctrinate? Here the government is seizing a child, effectively drafting a child like they do in the Army. In fact, public schooling is really a modified form of the Army. They draft the kids, they force their parents to send them into these government school buses that cart them away to this government institution from the time they're 6 years old, 5-6 hours a day, for 12 years, 5 days a week, 12 years. How can there not be indoctrination here? And this is the state doing this. This is the state textbooks, the state curriculum, the state school teachers. I will guarantee you this. I guarantee you will not find one public school in anywhere across this land that teaches a course in libertarianism. It's just not going to happen, because libertarianism is contrary to what they're indoctrinating the kids with, that America is a free enterprise country, that free enterprise is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, extensive economic regulations, foreign aid to dictators, farm subsidies, the drug war. That's what kids are indoctrinated with. Oh, the troops are dying for our rights and freedoms in Afghanistan and Iraq, and all the drone assassinations. It's necessary to protect our rights and freedoms here at home so that we can enjoy the Super Bowl and so forth. That indoctrination is taking place. It may be subtle, it may be very, very overt, but that's what kids are treated to for 12 years. And that's why when they reach the age of 18, their mind has been molded. They're convinced that America is a free enterprise country, and that's why they feel really uncomfortable around us libertarians. Because all of a sudden, we libertarians are saying, we oppose America's economic system. We don't like this system. And boy, they're just shocked. They're just shocked, like, oh, well, you're a traitor. You're unpatriotic. You must be a socialist. Because since America is free enterprise, and you're opposing America's economic system, that must make you the opposite, a socialist or a fascist or whatever. Well, that's the power of indoctrination. It's impossible to measure the harm that this does to the mind. I mean, I've met kids, in college and stuff, where they'll say, oh, you're saying that I've been indoctrinated? And I say, yeah. And they're like shocked, because the best indoctrinated person, this person doesn't even know he's been indoctrinated. Right? I mean, where could you find a better indoctrinated person than the person who doesn't know he's been indoctrinated but has? This is why the state controls education in every nation on earth. I mean, it's a no-brainer, that in Cuba, where, by the way, they have Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, they have strong public schooling systems, where the state seizes children, herds them into these institutions, and indoctrinates them into thinking that socialism is freedom, that Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and free public schooling, all these things in Cuba are free. It's what a free society is all about. They do the same thing here. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, this is free enterprise, the backbone of America's free enterprise system, the income tax, the IRS, and so forth. And they'll just gloss over the 1880s, I mean, you can see the glossing over that takes place in this New York Times review of this book. They're not there talking about the absence of an income tax, of a standing army, of torture, of a drug war, of assassinations, Social Security, Medicare. No, they don't talk about any of that. And that's the product. That's the result of indoctrination. And of course, there's a lot of worse damage that public schooling does. I mean, also on the front page of the New York Times, there's a guy that committed suicide after taking Adderall. And now let me get this clear. I'm not saying that private schools are that much better. I mean, they're licensed, and they know that if they If they go outside the boundaries of what they're supposed to do, they can get their license yanked. So they got to be real cautious. So, and a lot of them just model their programs after the public schools, and so they're better because they're not direct government employees. But it's not the ideal. The ideal is a total free market in education, and of course, the state just goes wild over that. Starts shaking and quivering. Oh my gosh, Jacob, education's too important to be left to the free market. Yeah, how about religion? Well, religion's different. I believe in freedom of religion, Okay, well, how about freedom of education? Oh, no, Jacob, where would the poor go to school? All that same old nonsense to justify this socialism in education. And the educational system is a socialist system. I mean, with the exception of what Milton Friedman pointed out, that the army is your epitome of a socialist structure. Well, it's really no different with public schooling. It's a socialist institution. It's a top-down command and control system. You got government employees, government curriculum, government textbooks, government school boards, even at the local level. It's a socialist institution. But then you go up to the higher level state and then the federal control over education. It's all a socialist structure. I mean, is it any wonder it is so horrendous? And when a kid rebels against this, what's the obvious assumption? That something's wrong with the kid. You see, in the mind of the statist, and all these people in public schools, no, I wouldn't say all, but most of them are the victims of previous indoctrination. So they're sitting there saying, this is a normal system where we're drafting kids, we're forcing their parents to send them into the school bus and put them into these institutions. This is all normal. Well, it's impossible to know how much damage this coercion, this force, this violence of extracting kids from their family by force under penalty of law, going to jail and so forth, how much damage that does to kids. And if a kid resists, they blame it on the kid. They say something's wrong with him. They diagnose it as attention deficit disorder. Let's say a kid's listening to some government school teacher go droning on and on. And I'm not saying that the teachers are bad people. I mean, hey, I got relatives that are school teachers or have been school teachers. And, some of my friends have been school teachers. No, it's the system that's bad. You see, I mean, when you got good people in a bad system, the system's going to win. It's a bad system. And so what they do, the kid sits there and he's bored with this structure. The bell rings, it goes to the next class, and he's looking at these boring textbooks that have been done by committee, and he's listening to some government school teacher there whose pay doesn't depend on any free market measure at all. Satisfaction of parents and so forth, and consumers. And he's bored. And he's looking around and stuff, and he looks at his own personal book that he sneaked into class, and attention deficit disorder, attention deficit disorder. They take him to the school counselor, and and they call the parents in, and they say, we got to prescribe to you some Adderall, and this will fix you. I mean, can you imagine putting drugs in a person because he's resistant to this aberrational system known as public schooling? Now you say again, that doesn't enter their minds, that the system is aberrant. They're looking at the kid and saying, well, if you don't conform to this system, there's something wrong with you. And so we need to inject drugs into you. And all too long, the parents, who are the victims of previous indoctrination, they believe in public schooling. They think the state has a legitimate role. Where would the poor go to school? All that nonsense. And so they go along with it. They say, yeah, put my kid on Adderall. Well, the New York Times front page story, this kid commits suicide because it turns out that Adderall is highly addictive, and it causes all kinds of problems, psychological problems and so forth. And that's what they're giving kids who are resistant to this system of regimentation. Now, granted, I mean, not everyone turns out, resisting the public school system. Well, not everyone resists the army. Let's say they draft it again. Well, most people would conform. They put up with the regimentation. They learn how to say yes, sir, and no, sir, and put left face and right face and march to the rear march, and they'd follow orders. And I mean, that's the way the army works, right? But there are some people that would resist the regimentation and say, this is not for me. And if there was a draft, they'd say, well, tough luck. And well, there's no telling what kind of damage you're doing to kids in this environment. I mean, the public school, like I say, is just a modified form of the Army. And there's, yeah, most kids go put up with the regimentation, the indoctrination. Hey, I was one of them, okay, but there's always people that resist it. And you there's no way to tell not only how much damage you're doing to the indoctrinated people and the people that go along with it, just because they don't want to fight it anymore, but how much damage you're doing to the people that are on Adderall and the attention deficit disorder and so forth. Not to mention, all the geniuses. I mean, you can see some of the geniuses that drop out, like in the business world, where they're, Facebook founder or, Apple founder or whatever. These are like geniuses, and they see through this system that doesn't fit for them. The highly structured, regimented system, and well, they dropped out of college, but you just wonder how many geniuses are destroyed by this system. Can you imagine a Mozart or a Beethoven spending his life in the army? And it's just, it doesn't compute. Well, suppose you force them into a public school where they have to take geology and state history and geography, and instead of just playing the piano all day long or composing all day long. I mean, that's what they want to do. That's all they care about doing. And there's no telling how many geniuses have had that pounded out of them because they're forced to go into this regimented system too. There's no telling how many benefits we've been deprived of other people that could have provided, tremendous music or inventions or whatever because of this highly regimented, controlled system. And it's impossible to measure the damage that public schooling does to a society. I mean, people say, oh, well, where would the poor go to school? Well, the poor are the ones that are paying the biggest price of this. I mean, look at President Obama. Does he send his children to public school? Of course not. He knows that the poor people in Washington are getting a raw deal. He's not going to subject his children to it. So he sends his children to a nice private school. I mean, that's a sign that the poor are not benefiting from this system. If they had the best school, the president would be sending his kids there. But he doesn't. It's a bad system. And in large part, it's bad because it's socialism. It's bad because it's indoctrination. It's bad because they're putting on kids on drugs, the regimentation, the coercion. And so you end up with this whole society of people that think this is a free enterprise system, that think the drug war is freedom, where you're putting people in jail. In fact, there's another fascinating article about this guy. It may have been in Saturday's paper in the New York Times about this 31-year-old guy. He's in law school. He's a star law student, and he got addicted to meth, and he started selling it. They busted him, and now they're going to send him to jail. I forget how many years they're going to send him to jail. They say he'll never practice law. They'll never give him a license, you see, because now, today, unlike 1885, you have to get the state's permission to engage in an occupation, just like, in the Soviet Union and China and so forth. So they're saying, we will never give a license to this guy. Well, he's a drug addict. I mean, that doesn't mean he can't be a good lawyer. There's people that have become president of the United States that ingested drugs. And where do they get off to send this guy to a penitentiary for doing nothing worse than engaging in self-destructive behavior and engaging in mutual consensual transactions, selling something peacefully to somebody who wants it? I mean, but you see the indoctrination is, oh, this is freedom. This is free enterprise. We're free. We're free. We're free. It's all freedom. The welfare state, the regulated economy, the controlled society. That's the power of indoctrination. So we got to break free of this. I mean, that's where we libertarians are. I mean, in a sense, we're freer than everybody around society because we've broken free. We've broken through the indoctrination. I told you earlier, I was a victim of this indoctrination. I went to public schools, but for some reason or another, I was able to achieve the breakthrough where the whole thing just comes cracking apart, and all of a sudden you're seeing reality. This is not a free enterprise system. This is a socialistic system. This is an interventionist system. This is a huge standing army with a military, an empire, bases all over the world, killing people, invading, occupying, torturing. This is not a free society, a constitutional republic. So we libertarians have a grip on reality here. And all we got to do is just keep sharing these ideas in order to hopefully cause this veneer that people have from the whole indoctrination syndrome, that starts to crack apart, and then people say, oh my gosh, now I see, now I realize I'm a libertarian, I've broken free of this. And that's happening big time. I mean, there's this is a huge movement. It's a glorious movement, because we're the ones that are leading humanity out of the darkness. And I got a feeling the next surge of interest and excitement about libertarianism, it's going to be bigger than ever. Obviously, there's a lot of people, the base, they're out there working, spreading libertarian ideas, and a lot of the young people especially. And this is an active, vibrant, exciting movement, and we got to just keep pushing. That's the show. Thanks so much for tuning in. See you next week.